Hey again, this is Josh, also known as GWiz from SpaceCat Design, and we are going to be building a launch pad today. I just wanted to first show the two options we have available, the normal purple with gold traces and the limited edition white with gold traces, of which we only have a few left. These particular ones are going to be using some Elias switches and some box box jade greens. Here I'm just kind of showing all the different stuff. I've got the reset buttons here, which I may not solder on because I'm probably going to use an Elite C, which has one built in. You can get these little silicone containers on our website, as well as these diodes here. They're normal. I like these the best, the Semtech type. They're hard, which makes it easier, I think, to get them in the holes. And here I'm trying to get my camera to zoom in on this, but for some reason it doesn't want to. Essentially, this is just lead-free solder. So, yeah, I don't know why my camera won't work, but you can get this on Amazon. I'll include some links in the notes here, or if you want, you can just get solder with lead from our store. Yeah, I don't know why this camera's doing this, so we should probably just go ahead and give up on this, huh? Yeah. Anyway, so yep, again, this is just kind of the basic look of what we need here, and we are going to be doing the white one, which you can see here was designed and developed by the combination of SpaceCat and Maple Computing. I seem to be having some camera issues, which is fun. I mean, you can see the logos there, so yeah. Also, the diodes, the part with the black line and the square hole is the negative, and that's the same part you're going to want to line up with the black line on the diodes themselves. But the first thing we need to do before any of that is just kind of get everything out of the way, and we're going to snap this bad boy. So just don't be scared. You can snap it right in half. I know a lot of people are worried they're going to break it, but you won't. These you can also just pop out with your fingers. You know, we wanted to make this easy for everybody, so it only is kind of hard to snap off this last piece here, which you'll see in a second. I've actually seen people use these little nubs because they like the way they look. It's almost impossible to do with your hands. I apologize for my camera zooming in and out there. I don't know what's going on, but if you just have flush cutters or needle nose pliers, you can just very carefully like put it right there. Now I didn't snip this, I just kind of used it to get some torque and pop that off, like as you can see right there, and you'll be left with the little squares, which you can chuck or keep, I guess, if for some reason you want them. And again, with the new launch pad, you'll see that these legs have the solder, the little copper square to be soldered later, so that it won't wobble anymore. Version 1 had some wobble issues, so instead of giving you glue dots, we're fixing it with solder. This is just kind of my junk glass thing, so I keep like diode legs and stuff in there. And that is about that. So alright, we have the two pieces here, and you know, again, as I was saying, you can see that the areas where the diodes are, they're marked with D and then a number. Those are diode spots, through hole diodes, and you're going to need 8 for the launch pad. It doesn't matter which version you have. The only difference between the white and the purple is the color, and the only differences between version 1 and version 2 are some very slight cosmetic changes on the PCB and the inclusion of the holes for cases. So let me just get these diodes out of the way here. So let's get these switches out of the way here and get my Elias? I can never tell. They're the 100-gram ones, though. I freaking love them. They are my daily driver. So if you watched my Soya's PCB build, you'll know I do diodes a little bit different than normal people. I just go ahead and, like, since these have such, like, harder to bend, and not in a ridiculous way, but they're just harder to bend, and a little more durable and sturdy legs, you can really, although I'm kind of mangling this one, I'll show you how to do this better with the next ones. But so I put it through and then I twist, and what that does is holds it in place. And these diodes are nice. These are the same ones we sell on SpaceCat. They don't poke as much as some of the other diodes you can get. So I end up, even though I have a band-aid on now, it's not from that. So yeah, here you can see I put them in a basic U shape and then just push them through until I feel like they're good. Let's get a close-up here of the diode direction. You can see the black line on the diode matches the black line on the PCB, as well as that being the square hole, which is the negative side. So you're going to want to go ahead and you're going to want to do that with all these diodes. Before I speed anything up here, again, just kind of note how I'm putting them through and then twisting them like that. And what that does is it also makes it easier when you're snipping the diodes off after you've soldered. So this particular PCB is actually going to one of our new sponsored Instagram people's, Lena Potato. I guess that's what she wants to be called. So we'll throw a link for her stuff in there too, and then this is just so she can flex a little bit when people ask her what was the point of being sponsored by SpaceCat. So yeah, want to make sure we do this one right, and I want to make sure that everyone notices that the position of the diodes changes from the top to or bottom to, depending on how you're looking at it. They're more on the side for that, but then the rest are in the middle, and that is just because of the positioning of the Pro Micro itself, and how we had to do all of the traces and everything. So once you get into a little rhythm here, it becomes not too difficult to just kind of bang these out. When I took this video, yes, I'm doing a voiceover rather than talking live during it. I learned my lesson, but when I was doing this video, I intentionally took my time just because you know, I want to make sure that the product that I'm giving out is going to be the best one, and I'm sure everybody feels the same way. So just take your time. I mean, you could bang one of these out in 10-15 minutes, I'm sure, but unless you're like super pro and never mess up, you could be setting yourself up for issues. So I just take my time, put some music on, get these diodes in there, and then from here we're gonna just start to solder. But you can see the shape in the back kind of taking place. It starts to look like some kind of crazy weapon. You can flatten the legs down too, which I will do. Well, not sure when my camera zoomed in again. Sorry about that. Definitely something going on there with that, but we're installing the last two now. And again, just a similar U shape, and push it in there, and see how I take both legs and just kind of do a little twist action. And then you can really bend them anywhere to kind of get them out of your way. You see right there, I bent the bottom ones, like just to kind of face down. And I'm going to do it again with this one, and then kind of go back and bend the diode legs on the opposite side of the PCB in a way so they're not sticking out and dangerous. I mean, honestly, they are. They're sharp. These are a little less sharp, but you don't want to grab this thing the wrong way. That could be bad. So definitely you'll see here kind of what I'm talking about. So here is what it looks like once all the diodes are in. You can see the orientation. If you're having trouble with that, I know that's a big one for everyone. And right here, I'll get my kind of grab bag of junk ready. Not grab bag, but a grab container. And yep, this is the flattening out I was talking about. I just kind of face them away from each other. It makes soldering easy. I mean, we're not going to solder that side first. we're going to solder the side you're kind of looking at now first, and then clip, and then add solder just to make sure the connection is good all the way through. So I just got my new Hakko iron and I love it. The tip is kind of not great. I need to change it, but right here you're gonna see just regular soldering. Just put the tip very close so it's touching the trace pad and also the diode. And right now my iron is about 755 degrees, so even with lead-free solder, it still turns into the molten liquid very, very fast. And yeah, this was a pain, so I just kind of propped it up. And yeah, I mean, feel free to do that too. You're not going to mess anything up if you have, you know, a PCB holder or something like that. Just be careful. That's all. That's the biggest thing. Be careful, watch guides, and you know, read about it. Don't just YOLO into some project. You're gonna mess up more often than not, and I'm guilty just like everyone else, which is one of the reasons we're doing this video. So each diode gets you know, 2 solder points, and I will say, you know, the bottom 6 diodes, the middle part, kind of where they're very, very close and almost meet, it can be a pain. If you have a thinner tip like the ones we sell at SpaceCat, yeah, you might want to just change that. And I should have done that before this video, but I'm just a horrible person, I guess. So, you know, once you get all that and you kind of can clean up, you can go back and touch up solder, which is what I'm doing here. I'm just trying to kind of make it a better connection, make sure it looks good. You definitely don't want to solder to the point to where like you have solder going up and hitting the diode, because that's a good way to fry that thing, and you probably won't find out until the very end. So yeah, so for now, let's just get a little look here, make sure everything looks like it's where it should be. At some point I'll probably hopefully do this on camera so you guys can see what's going on. There I am. Okay, so you can see the amount of solder I do. You might need to go back and just kind of freeze frame that, and then my diode thing kind of comes back here, so it's much easier to just clip, and then what you end up with is they both kind of stick together, so you end up with, you know, one real easy kind of object, which is just 2 diode legs like swirled together, and you can just throw it right in there. And you might be wondering why I keep these. If I'm gonna hot swap something, you definitely want to use diode or LED legs, and since I really like the hardness of these, I save these. Even though they are a little twisted, you can still always go back and fix them. Be careful when you're snipping. You want to make sure, you know, you're not scratching up the PCB where the traces are, or you don't snip you know, the wrong spot, God forbid. Right now we're still in the stage where it would be pretty easy to fix any issues, but the more we progress, it's going to be harder and harder, and you'll see that. So now we've got one side completely done and clipped, and what I do is now I go back, and even though this is the top side that you would see, I just add a very, very little bit of solder to the top of the diodes, the opposite side you were soldering before. And this is just to make sure the connection is solid, goes all the way through. You'll notice if you don't need to add diode, or solder to a diode right away, because it'll be obvious. It'll have a nice little mound there. People will kill me for saying you want a mound of solder, but it'll be obvious. You'll have enough, and then some of them you'll see just the diode legs kind of sticking out, and those are the ones you want to add a little bit to, just to make sure like the connection goes all the way through. And of course, when you're soldering and doing this kind of stuff, I should have mentioned, and I will in the notes, you always want to wear your eye protection, especially when doing the soldering and the snipping. The snipping things, they can fly everywhere. I try to keep my hand over it just to kind of be safe, but you know, it happens. And possibly a mask of some kind. That's kind of up to you. I'm able to build these quick enough and have taught myself to just breathe out during every soldering. And then, so here you go. Here's what the finished version of the PCB would look like with the diodes soldered. So yeah, what I meant to say was, I will just breathe out when I'm soldering, so the flux smoke just gets blown away from me. It's kind of a little trick. So here you have the headers. I have some special white ones that I got just for this build. They fit in the Pro Micro or Elite C in this case. You know, they're normal, they're fine. The connections are great. The only reason I'm using the white ones is because this launch pad's white. Too bad the microcontroller's not white, but maybe later. This part seems to have thrown people a little bit while I struggle to get my camera to work here. You're not going to use the full strip. So you can see there's a full strip. At some point this will focus correctly, and that's good enough. So you can see on the right there's a full strip. Okay, and same thing on the left. Now on the Launchpad build, it is different, and we did this for just ease and space concerns. No pun intended. You will actually only need four groups of 3, which I'll show you here in a second. You can either just kind of bend them, break them yourself that way, or if you want to snip them, that's fine. But a lot of people will try to do this, and they're like, hey, the headers don't fit. They're incorrect. Well, no, they're actually not made to do that. So here, I'm breaking mine off in little sections of 3, and that should actually be one whole side of a header. So you should have a whole nother you can put away there. Now, people's opinion on how to do this changes to, I like to do something weird and put the put the short side through the top part, and then the bottom ones, you'll see I'll do it opposite. And that's just to make sure that I'm keeping myself in check as far as how much solder and making sure I clip extra pins off. So I recommend starting with the top 2 sets of 3. You know, you will have a little bit of time once you're done soldering, and it is not a long period at all. But once everything's kind of warmed up and you've done the soldering of these, you'll have a little bit of time where you can kind of turn it and make some adjustments, you know, just with your fingers, because it'll still be warm enough. Or if you need to, you can bust out pliers or something. You definitely want to check though at this point. So you can see it's a little wonky. I didn't get it very straight, but what I'm going to do is I'll push so that the white goes all the way down to the board, and honestly not terrible, but you know, here's where I do it a little different. So now if my camera will focus, yes, something is going on with this camera, sorry folks, but I will do it the opposite way. So now the shorter part of the legs are on the other side. And this is always a pain too, because it's like you gotta they'll keep falling, so you may need to do just one group of 3 at a time, which is super annoying, but if you want to get it right. And easiest way to do this is just make it so that the pin that you can see from the headers is in the middle, centered as best as possible. Again, if it's off, don't worry. You'll see here, like, again, you have time. Even if it's a little bit bent, you can kind of just bend it back the same you would as if you just soldered a switch and you were like, damn, it's a little bit to the left. You can kind of just brute force it with a little bit of luck and a little bit of swag and flex, I guess. So here's the last one, and again, I'm breathing in, you know, beforehand, and as that flux smoke is coming out, I'm breathing out, and you'll see the smoke might start to come towards me but then get pushed away. I don't think that this is the most scientific and safe way, but you know, I read about that on some forums and I've stuck to that trick ever since. So again, if this thing would focus, you'd be able to see kind of what I'm talking about here. There we go. So at this point, I just made it so that all the pins are the same size, even though I put them in at different ways. And that's just, I've had some weird issues in the past where things would break or not be sturdy enough. So that's why that gets done. But I mean, feel free to not do that. As soon as I am able to get there it is. Okay, so now we have the Elite C in the correct spot. And what you can do here is, once it goes on, that's good. You know, that means it fits. So what you can do is put a piece of tape, vinyl electrical tape, underneath, and that'll help prevent any shorts, but we can get into that later. Right here I'm just showing the plate and how a switch goes on. Whoops. And people have asked which way should the plate go, and the answer is if you're using 8 keys it doesn't matter, because you're not using a stabilizer. And if you are going to use a stabilizer for like a middle, like a centered switch for a longer key, you know, I don't want to say it depends on the stabilizers you have, because that's not technically true, but it could change. So what you want to do is get your stabilizers in there as best you can, and then you'll know which plate is necessary. So here I'm just, you know, doing a little bit more, just kind of clipping for space, because this is a pretty tight build. So all that soldering that I did with the headers, I'm now clipping the tops off of the bottommost part of that, so that it's flat as possible. Because to my previous point, what you can do is put some vinyl tape where the Pro Micro will sit, so you don't have to worry about things touching and possibly shorting. For this build, I'm going to try to do something a little cleaner and maybe a little riskier, which is basically just have the Elite C kind of sitting in the middle of the pins. Now, I'll show you a close-up of that. I don't know if that is something that is not recommended to do. I've done it several times with several different builds, just for space requirements, and it's fine. Certainly, if there's issues, please, you know, post in the comments. We can address those. But for this, I didn't want to use vinyl tape because it can just be kind of ugly. So now we have space for the top 2 switches, where the leftover header was kind of blocking us. So you want to make sure it gets in there, fits really well. These particular switches, they're very tight on this build. So yeah, you can see once I pop them in, I literally have to kind of pop the switch back out. And that is just this switch. You'll find like the box switches in the top right corner here. They're not that same way. It just depends on the housing, I suppose. And these they're Gatoron switch housings, I believe, and they're just called alias switches because maybe that's the name of the person. I can't quite remember. But our sponsored person, Lena, she liked the pink switches, so we are giving her the pink ones. This particular build, we're going to do 8 keys. So like I said, the plate doesn't matter too much. You know, as long as the legs line up, you're good. And that's really going to be the only deciding factor. If the legs line up, you're good. Don't worry about don't worry about it in an 8-key build like that. Now, if you're gonna do single switches and use stabilizers, then yeah, you're gonna want to make sure your stabilizers fit correctly with the plate. And what I did there was just I put all switches in, and then I kind of just pushed down just to make sure everything's tight. I did a dynamite job keeping everything in focus on the screen here, you can see. I apologize for that, but here I'm just straightening them out, pressing them in, and you'll see what I was talking about with where the leg holes, how they match. So, you know, we're going to be good to go. And I was a little concerned about the topmost switches with the placement of the Elite C and the reset button, but then I realized it'll actually be on the opposite side as I thought. So, not a big deal. This is what it's going to look like. and then I'll show you. You want to make sure the legs go so that the two pads match each other. So, for instance, here we go. Now they touch. You can solder that point, and it'll keep the leg together, and there will be no wobble. And if it would focus, you'd get a little bit better shot of that. There you go. And that's that. That's how you solder those together. I mean, you can still use glue if you'd like. You can use anything or nothing. There's a lot of cases out there now. Some are by Strata KBs, some are 3D printed and available on Thingiverse. Yeah, definitely check, Reddit and Mech Market. There's a lot of them out there. So what we're gonna do here, and this is definitely something I get a lot of, I guess, issues sent to me about, is the order of things. So once your switches are through the plate and you have not soldered on your Pro Micro or Elite C, you have to do this first or you will be unable to reach these two switches. So I just solder every switch at this point. I don't think there's any reason to not do it that way. Again, we're using the Elite C, so to the left there, where my thumb is on my left hand, we're not going to be using that reset. I think the Elite C one, which is built in, is just easier, but that is where you would solder that in. And if we get enough questions about that, I can do a little add-on video to show. So here we are, we're just soldering all the switches. Again, same thing, be careful, wear eyewear, your different types of protection. I tend to be on the overly cautious side, but I'd rather be safe than sorry. You only get one pair of eyes, you only get one set of lungs. So, there's definitely some debate as to what is better for you. Well, not better, but which one is more harmful, I suppose. Lead-free, the smoke and flux that comes out, is actually supposed to be worse for you to be inhaling than if you were using lead solder, but then of course the lead solder is more potentially harmful in a lot of other ways. So I wouldn't recommend eating or drinking no matter what while you're soldering, and that's just for a lot of reasons. I think you can figure out most without me having to tell you, but when you're soldering these in, just make sure there's enough to fill the entire the little hole that the pin is in from the switch itself. And don't be afraid to, if you're not sure if you got it right, now is the time to bust out your little desolder suction vacuum thing and redo it now rather than later after you have an Elite C on top of two switches. So definitely you want to do that. And on that note, let me just show you guys here. So for all intents and purposes, this is, like what it's going to look like. Again, like I said, it's tight in there, so you want to make sure there's no pieces of metal sticking up anywhere that don't need to be. And I also get a lot of people who have little pieces of solder or little pins that get caught in the middle, and those can and will short and possibly break things. So you definitely want to make sure that you don't do that. And here I'm just kind of test fitting the Elite C. If you need to make some changes, you can either take some pliers or just use your hands like this. That right there is where the electrical tape would normally go, just to be sure. But like I said, for this one, I want it to kind of look a little nicer, cleaner, and intentionally done. Launchpad version 3 is something we are working on, and we're definitely keeping this in mind. So I'm going to actually try to position it about halfway through. I don't want it too long to where with the legs on it's hitting the ground, or the table or wherever you have it, because that's going to be bad. But I also don't want it too short to where there could be things touching. And this is just OCD. Again, you could use white vinyl tape, any color tape, or truthfully, This one is probably done well enough to where I could push that thing all the way down, solder it, and it would still be fine. But again, you know, just to be sure, and to kind of cover all bases with any of our customers who maybe you know, did some of the steps a little different earlier, and you have a little bit sitting there, you can certainly kind of fix it from here. And this is going to be the hardest part for most people, I think. Sans maybe the reset button. I mean, the good news is you only have to basically do one header strip, because it's 12 total, so it's not terrible. I don't think so anyway, and that's kind of the reason we did that, because you're not actually using these other ones, and you know, so now they're left open for whatever you need. If you want to add an RGB strip or something, or you know, it's also just less to solder, because soldering controller sucks. And if you ever need to desolder this later, it's going to be a hell of a lot easier to desolder 12 than it is 24. The difference is going to be nuts. You may actually be able to save the chip at that point. But you can see here that the pins are super high. So that's something we'll have to cut to. Snip with our flush wire clippers, which we also sell at SpaceCat Design. It's almost like this video is for a store. So now I'm going to just test by putting the feet on. So just go ahead and slide these in. And then this was strictly so I could check the height, and it was close, so I do have to snip the top of these off. And again, sit your finger on top. You know, don't cut yourself obviously, but kind of putting your finger on top like that will stop most 95% of these things from flying in odd directions. The smaller ones are riskier clips. Those things tend to kind of wherever the place you least want them. So if you've got cats or something, you know, it'll land right in front of them, something like that. Just be careful. I mean, soldering is pretty safe, but you can hurt yourself and those around you if you're not safe, and not being safe is silly. So once we get all these bad boys cut, let's see if we can get a nice little picture here of what that looks like, the difference. So you can see how I left space in between. It's a little bit crooked, but that's okay. It'll still work, and I still think it looks better than having vinyl tape. So let's throw these legs on here. Make sure obviously the pads match up, because if they don't, you won't be able to solder them. I find desoldering these is pretty easy, but I have found that it seems like the pad comes with it sometimes, even more so than normal. So if you're not getting any wobble or anything, you know, don't feel obligated to do the legs. Or if you feel like you might want to throw this into one of those 3D printed cases, you know, it'll actually work if you take the legs off. So it's worth not soldering right away unless you're positive you're not going to be using another case or anything. And on that note, depending on the case, you may not use the plate either for the launch pad. So that's definitely going to be something you'll have to look at, whoever you bought the case from, and they'll let you know. But yeah, I mean, this is it basically. You know, the last step would be just to solder those legs on, which is what we're going to do here. You can kind of see what I'm talking about. I kind of just sit it in between both, and then real quick just kind of go up and down, and eventually you get a nice little on both sides. And again, you know, this is actually more of a pain with lead-free solder, but to each their own. This one we definitely wanted to do lead-free, so, and at least these are big enough to where it's pretty simple, and they're not close to anything that you can really damage. So, you know, and here we go. I mean, that's literally it. That's a launch pad, and that's it. Obviously, if you are quick, you can bang one of those out in 10-15 minutes, and even if you're not, you can watch along with this video and take you about 30 minutes. And again, like I said, the Elite C is a little more like kind of crooked than I wanted it to be, but I probably will go back and fix that by just reheating the pins in the back there on the right, and just to kind of make it a little bit more flat. It looks like it's bent from something, but it's not. It's just the way I have it on there. The headers you get, unless you buy the special color ones, which, like I said, we will have on our site, are going to be black.